Maximillian class armor is the heaviest personal protection used by the Crusader Knight orders. This armor has seen extensive use in sieges and battles in confined spaces where maneuverability is less important than extraordinary protection and devastating power in melee, as well as the ability to bring their long-range heavy machine gun lances to bear against especially powerful foes and armored heretic vehicles. Each Maximillian Knight is supported by a cadre of lay brethren men-at-arms, who deal with enemy anti-armor troops and act as spotters for the Knight, whose vision on the battlefield is limited. They also maintain the immense engines that power the suit, which is prone to all sorts of malfunctions and overheating. The voracious appetite for fuel these engines have is unmatched, and require constant feeding to maintain the ability of these hulking battlesuits to fight for any length of time. Unlike the machine armor used by the standard Faithful Forces, Maximillian armor is a design developed independently. Its origins lie in a military pilgrimage made into the Levant, based on a dream of their stylite monk Georgi, who was granted a vision of the Pillar of Life. A major military expedition which combined the forces of several knightly orders was launched into the heretic domains to the location pointed out by the Holy Stylite. The story of the heroic expedition of 10,000 knights is a popular subject of books and plays to this day, and shrouded in much mystery and legend. The knights who undertook the pilgrimage had each taken a vow of silence, so the truth of the matter may never be known. What is known, however, is that the expedition returned with fragments of an ancient armor, as well as some extraordinarily large bones found atop a great rock pillar seen in the vision of Holy Georgie. Their origin is the subject of intense speculation and debate, with some saying that they once belonged to the Nephilim, the titans mentioned in the oldest surviving holy books. From these fragments, the artificers of the Order of the Aurelian Angelic Knights of St. George developed a blueprint for Maximillian armor, combining their immense bulk with engine technology developed for machine armor. Whereas standard machine armor is never modified due to their rarity, the Maximillian suits and their weapons are modified when their previous wearer is killed or wounded, so they can no longer serve in combat. A careful process of testing and spiritual questioning by the church overseers determines which of the sword brethren is allowed to wear the suit, which is then modified to fit its new wearer and their fighting style, armaments, and assigned role in combat. Each suit can have all sorts of customization, such as vermiculite layers that protect the wearer against flamethrowers, or a self-contained breathing apparatus that shields the knight from gas weapons. Alrighty, giant armor hype. This is really cool because this is the first time, to my reckoning, that we're really seeing much about what the Crusaders look like, what the Crusader orders look like in the modern age. It's been a wait, basically, because we knew that they had a set number of factions that the devs wanted to get into the rulebook and all this kind of stuff, but this is dope, right? We're starting to see some Crusader stuff, and it's cool. Hopefully this will help kind of assuage the seemingly endless concerns of a small percentage of people who find out that Crusader Knights are not like the be-all and fucking end-all of everything in Trench Crusade, and will make you happy now that you're learning something about them. So we have this Maximillian armor. Maximillian basically is a Latin word. It means the greatest or the largest, and this is large. If you look at the art, it's like 3, if not 3.5 times bigger than the guy standing beside it, and we have no reason to feel like the guy standing beside it is small. So 3.5 times the height of a man. There's somebody in that thing. We can assume, well, this is all assumptions right now because we don't know anything. I don't think these guys end up getting the old Jesus juice, the communicant style thing, and end up being like this big, because that would make them basically larger than paladins, which seems difficult to comprehend. I think they're like, they're big, like they're Crusader big, but the suit itself is hugely mechanized inside, and they are reasonably normal sized inside. That's why it has such difficulty moving. That's why it tends to do siege ops and things of that nature. But, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So an important word to talk about is stylite. A stylite is an ascetic monk who lives on top of a pillar. Very specifically, that is what they used to do. They would live on top of a pillar. This was a thing around the 5th century AD in Syria, Turkey, and Greece, and places like that. Very specifically, an ascetic is someone who they embrace a life of extreme self-discipline. They abstain from essentially all forms of indulgence for religious reasons. They will normally put themselves in a position of, let's refer to it as survivable suffering. In this case, living on top of a pillar basically would deny you every earthly comfort. Historically, they would become something of like a lightning rod for the faithful locally, or abroad. People would travel to see them, and they were referred to as things like pillar saints and things of that nature. So one of these guys, now this is where it gets really interesting, a vision from one of these guys called Georgie is enough to send 10,000 knights from a variety of orders, right? It literally says several knightly orders, into heretic lands. So we're learning a lot about what the actual Crusader Knights are capable of here. We know now that they take they take part of a lot of like siege warfare, like attacking fortifications. You don't build stuff that isn't meeting the needs of what your army, what your troops need to do. So if they decide that they're going to like build these big suits of armor, it's because that's what they need, right? They need siege breakers essentially, and that's what these things do. So we know that the Crusaders are badass enough to crack heretic or black rail or the court fortifications, that they can deal with that kind of stuff on the assault, and that they can go into heretic domains, like 10,000 of them, yes, but like going into heretic domains is no easy feat in and of itself. So they can roll in there, they can have their scraps, they can win, they can go in with a plan, and they can actually carry out that plan, which is to get to a very specific place foreseen by Georgie and get what they need to get there, which turns out to be scraps of this like giant armor that they assume used to belong to the Nephilim. Now, the Nephilim in and of themselves are, from what I can tell, a contended concept as to what exactly they are. Giants, yes, but the origin thereof, that's where people seem to argue a lot about what they might actually be. The one that I'm going with is that just dude angels thought like human chicks were hot and banged them, and they ended up having giant babies. Because it's suitably ridiculous. I think that's the one I'm going to go with. But yes, basically, angels and humans maybe had babies, and those babies were the Nephilim, and they were giants. That's where giants came from in the Bible. We've talked about it before. Giants are actually mentioned quite a bit in the Bible, and even the descendants of the Nephilim are mentioned in the Bible. So maybe that's it. But they come out with this armor. They use this armor to build these giant suits, to inspire these giant suits, and then they use the science of the machine armor of those engines to power them, to make them reasonably mobile. Now, I say reasonably mobile because something tells me the most mobile element of these things is the arms. I guarantee you that there's a lot of motion in those arms as they're hoisting shields and swinging axes and smashing stuff all around them, and that the everything else is reasonably stationary. Like all they really need to be able to do is swing weapons, crack walls, stuff of that nature. The engine on the back of it is also tremendously big, and the engine on the back of this thing is about the same size as the actual chest piece itself. Like the upper body is basically doubled, and part of that is armor, part of that is space to have a human being, part of that is all the stuff required to move it, and then the other part is just generating the kinetic power required to move it, which is pretty crazy. One of the touches that I thought was really nice was they talked about vermiculite layers to protect against like fire and stuff like that. So vermiculite will respond to heat. Basically, when heated to over like 300 degrees, it will expand significantly, and it'll create this like lightweight insulating layer. It's got a very low thermal conductivity and a very high melting point, and it's used a lot in like fire resistant and where stuff really needs to be like safe from fire and fireproofing and things of that nature. They will use this. So take into account that there needs to be, within these suits, there needs to be room for this stuff to expand as well, right? It says expands significantly when I Google this stuff. So you got to have room in there for that to occur without crushing the individual or hindering movement too much. And then it will have maybe like independent air filtration systems to protect from gas and all kinds of stuff. But these things are really, really cool. They need a small army to keep them going. They're prone to breaking down on the battlefield. They seem like the kind of thing that, whilst incredibly useful, also is incredibly difficult to keep going and to maintain the function thereof in a live fire. And one could potentially interpret it that the reason they're used is because of their origin rather than overall their usefulness or ease of use. Like, these were essentially granted to mankind through a vision of Georgie. Now, I never actually said it the first time I mentioned it, but as I said, this vision was enough to get 10,000 people walking or on horseback or whatever into heretic domains and scrapping. That implies that Georgie's got a bit of a fucking high hit rate when it comes to accuracy. They weren't just doing it because some lad on a pole was like, oh yeah, by the way, saw this shit, you want to go check it out. He obviously had a history of accuracy, of receiving these messages maybe, or these hints of different things that help the knightly orders to achieve their aims, and that's why they did it. That's the only thing that makes any degree of sense, is that they had a very strong reason to believe that this dude was correct, and the most likely reason to believe that he was correct is because he had been previously correct. So that's really interesting aspect of it, and is maybe a fun take on the Crusaders' version of a synod, in a way, is that they are receiving live, direct from wherever it is they think it's coming from. In this case, it would obviously be heavenly in origin, instruction as to where they need to go and where they need to be. And the reason that they're jumping on this stuff is because we know that within the Crusader Knights lore, they're incredibly contrite and forced to be incredibly contrite about the history of what occurred, of the first heresy. So yeah, it's an incredible piece of art, and it's such a striking image, these like tremendously huge knights on the battlefield. But I'm incredibly eager to learn more about them and more about the Crusaders in general, and I'm hoping that this will be the start of things when it comes to learning more about these knightly orders and how they're going to appear in game and things of that nature. That would be absolutely sick. But yeah, that's it for this video. Once again, thank you all so very much for watching. Remember to like the video only if you actually liked the video. Hit that little bell for notifications and stuff, and curate your subscriptions feed. You know, you're gonna have to move out old people that you don't watch anymore, even if that ends up being me, and keep an eye on the people who entertain you and whose stuff you really value. That's how YouTube is working these days. So you're just gonna have to do it. That's it, folks. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of the Maximillian armor and what this means maybe for upcoming lore drops. All the best.